Hello again, everybody. I hope everyone's keeping well and you're continuing on in your knowledge stream about everything and understanding that it's not gospel, literally truth. Everything is a work in progress, and that's the difference between a truther and a truther. A truther thinks they've discovered the absolute truth every time until they discover the next one, where a truther is constantly looking. A truther, Truther. Now, let's talk about UAPs, UFOs. Not, I'm not. What I'm putting out here is not necessarily new. It's not new at all, really. It's been long covered ever since the great work of Jacques Vallée and John Keel regarding that the UFO phenomena is somehow connected to the interdimensional fairies, she, and in the case of Rosemary Ellen Guiley, the jinn, interdimensional life forms and other forms that live around us, other consciousness that we can't access because it's in a different dimension. And often it's hostile and pathological towards humanity and jealous. Now, the concept of that being behind the UFO, alien abduction, UAP thing is well documented. Jacques Vallée's Passport to Magonia and John Keel's Our Haunted Planet covered this very well, particularly Jacques Vallée's work. Now, I'm just going to throw in from another angle again, another flavor into the stew, another ingredient into the gumbo, if you, to use that expression. What if UAPs are literally fairy technology, the technology of the good folk, what the English call the fae, what the Irish call the she, that has now advanced beyond human technology and is incapable of performing interdimensional travel into our reality. Now, this idea first came to me a long time ago, and I've been mentioning it casually over the years. Since the famous Turkish event of those remarkable videos from 2008 and 7, I think it is, that show this basically this literally bizarre machine changing, ship shifting over the sea in Turkey that was filmed by a man there and during a UFO flap, and quite clearly at one point shows what looks like grey aliens in the craft. It's still the most incredible footage. It's never been debunked, and it never will be debunked. Now, if you look at the Irish folklore, there's lots of stories of people who've gone into the fairy world, that they've been brought into the fairy world. And you also, what they say is it's generally backward and in a bad way compared to the human world. So in the Irish folklore, rural sort of tradition, you might be walking down a road one day and experience the fairy stray and find yourself in the she or the fairyland version of Ireland, of that part of Ireland. And generally reports were that their livestock were badly taken care of, their fields were badly maintained, they lived in shacks. They were about 200 years. Now, this would be people who went into fairyland in the 20th century. They said they were about 200 years behind where humans were in Ireland at that period. Funny enough, you have the alien abduction stuff, and you had people like Whitley Strieber saying, and also I think the Fire in the Sky Man. They said that the spaceships were often very unhygienic and looked like in the interior looked like a Victorian hospital. Very unhygienic. You know, Travis Walton said this. Very unhygienic. Very nasty. Very like what you'd imagine if they had the operating theatres of Victorian England during the time of Burke and Hare and all that stuff were like. Now, what if, while human beings in this reality were fighting World War One, World War Two, not knowing how many genders there are, falling into cultural Marxism, not not knowing what a woman was, concerning themselves with historical revisionism, all kinds of neurotics as a result of evolutionary psychology, their personality disorders becoming part of culture, government statutes, government law, and culture. And while the human world was degrading, the good folk, as the Irish would call them, the good people, in the other world were advancing their technology to the point where they can do what they want now. This is, are we seeing interdimensional, I hate the word fae. I know it's a real word, and I know it comes from an old Roman word that made its way into English, but when I hear use the term fae, I always think of like something, people kind of cosplay or something, but a fae craft, a she craft, fairy, fairy machinery that's now capable of feats that we can't do. Our technology is not capable of. And I saw a guy on Tucker Carlson recently saying that the New Jersey, he was some congressman. I wouldn't trust these guys because, firstly, they're politicians, and secondly, they could be setting you up for some kind of scam. Saying that the New Jersey drone flap was Chinese technology as an extension of the balloon technology. I don't believe any of that. No way. No way do I believe that for a minute. That was definitely a classic UFO flap, and there was a very powerful spiritual dimension to it that to many people who experience it personally, close up. Now, so they have not only the ability to travel into our, like I say, in the past it was probably, they used their magic, like magic and technology are kind of indistinguishable anyway, they're kind of science anyway. In the past they would have used their magic to abduct children, like in Irish poems like the fairy, the stolen child, and so on. They would have used their form of sorceries to do this, like we use shamanism to encroach into the spiritual world. So, assuming that they've now developed that, now there is such things as magical technologies. That's what, like, basically quantum computing is. Quantum computers throw calculations off into an unknown dimension, and they come back solved. And none of them say, well, that was handy, but no one actually says, well, who's actually solving them on the other side? But they come back solved. Now, like I said, while humans were concerning themselves with drag queen story time and, Desmond is amazing, the other folk, the good folk in the other world, were technologically becoming more advanced ahead of us. This is not unusual in empires. If you look at the history of evolutionary psychology, you see like things like, Christianity played the major role in the destruction of the Roman Empire. But prior to that, there was all kinds of neuroses coming in. There was great social breakdown. There was lots of divorces. There was lots of fracturing between the sexes. There was things like death cults, such as Dies Manibus and this kind of thing, that by the time Christianity came along, it was ready for it, because there was this, and then you had also the invasions of Rome by the Goths, the Visigoths, and so on. But it was evolutionary psychology is a very good subject to study because it kind of tells you, it kind of shows you. They don't teach you in school because it's too useful. It's one of those things, It's like psychopathy. They don't teach that in school because it's too useful. And so much of the world's problems, humanity's problems, is caused by neuroses. An individual's neuroses somehow becomes a cultural trope. So while human beings were becoming fucked up, completely fucked up, right? Lost their way. Western civilization went into a death spiral. While we were doing all that stuff, taking down Confederate statues and rewriting books and basically doing what the Third Reich were doing, except calling herself, social justice warriors. While that was all going on, that distractive nonsense, the good folk were working on their magical technology. We're working on their technology, and they now have an edge over us. They can actually now come in and out of our dimensions. Now, I know this is very difficult for people who follow the kind of Joe Rogan aliens thing. Joe Rogan does some fantastic programs on all this kind of stuff. and he's a great, a great asset to have for these kind of discussions on a social level, on a greater cultural level. But a lot of him and a lot of his audience, and I don't mean this in a disparaging way, they could be right too, are very much locked into the alien spaceships thing. Like, even when I was younger, I found that hard to believe. Why would you fly all the way here from another part of the universe only to hide? And then you get all the cliches. Oh, they're here to protect us from nukes and stuff, but nuking ourselves and stuff like that, and all this kind of nonsense. This thing we had here. Gotcha. All this kind of nonsense, and one of Billy's hairs, and I never bought any of that. It just seemed like very hippie, very cliched, and it was also governments. See, governments don't know what these things are either. You have these things like disclosure, and they say, well, the governments are going to tell us what they know. The governments don't know shit about this stuff. They're just as bewildered as the rest of us. This is why they've been very quiet about it. And they've been trying to see if they can find ways to use it against us, the CIA and so on. So that's my hypothesis that I'm throwing out there for now. I'm not saying I believe it, but is it possible that the good folk have developed interdimensional travel, even space travel, better than humans, because humans have been basically devolving since the beginning of the 20th century, really. I know we've achieved a lot of things, but instead culturally, we've definitely fallen apart, and there's been nothing new technology-wise since the 1960s, and anything that is new is just refinements of things that already exist. At the end of the day, AI is a deep learning language model based on digital technology from the 1960s. That's not to say it can't be hijacked by entities and stuff like that. Absolutely, it can be, and it is, I think. But anyway,